Hello everybody! Today we are making another ornament. We are going to be doing this adorable little snow globe kitty cat ornament, which is so cute. I made this a few months ago initially because, well, I saw the fabric and I thought it was really cute and I bought it. But then it kind of sat on my shelf for a while. And then unfortunately we lost one of our sweet little kitty cats. She passed away. And so I was feeling really sad and I wanted to make something kitty cat-ish, so I created this ornament. But then just the day before yesterday, my other cat passed away. So we lost both of our cats within a few months of each other. They were both very old. We were kind of expecting it, but it's still been really, really difficult. And so just because I was thinking about it again, I decided to revisit this ornament and I got the fabric back out. Now we had bought several bolts of each of these fabrics, so we put together some kits as well. So if you are interested in getting a kit with these exact materials, then you can do so. Otherwise, you could use this tutorial to create any kind of like snow globe ornament with this pattern that you wanted to. You can use any kind of picture in the center, logos, and sports teams, pictures printed onto fabric. There are just so many things that you can do using this pattern. So I hope that you enjoy it and that you find a really special reason to do an ornament like this as well, just like I have. So let me show you all of the things that I'm going to be using in this ornament. So I'll just show you what's in my kit. So first of all, you're going to need a 3-inch smooth foam ball. Now when I say smooth foam, I'm not talking about the brand smooth foam, because the brand smooth foam is really hard. It's hard to push pins into, but you just want your surface of your foam ball to be smooth, because the first layer of this ornament is laying flat on the ball, which means that if there's any kind of like roughness here, you'll be able to see it through that fabric. So you want it to be smooth, but you also want it to be soft. So in addition to that, you also want to have a ball that has some special markings on it. So there's a few brands that have this, where you can get a foam ball that has a line going around the center, which we like to call the equator. And you know what? I'm looking in my screen in front of me, and it looks like this might be hard to see. I think I can see a little bit of like flash reflecting off of my ball. So I'm really sorry if you can't see what I'm showing you here, but there is a line going around the ball, dividing it in half basically. We like to call that the equator. And then also on either side of that, there are dots. So on the top and on the bottom, they're little imprint markings, and we like to call that the pole markings. So the North and South Pole, almost like you've got a little Earth and it's divided by the equator, and you've got a North Pole and a South Pole. And that's going to help with placing our fabric when we begin each half of the ball. So some of the smooth foam balls do have these markings and some don't. If you have a ball that does not have these markings, we actually have another video that shows you how to create them yourself on the ball, and I'll put a link to that video right below this one. And of course, we carry the balls that have those markings and that are soft foam and smooth in the Ornament Girls shop. So I'll put a link to those below this video as well. So let's move along. So you're also going to need 2 squares of fabric, one for each side of the ball. And what I'm going to be using are 2 fussy cuts of 2 different kitty cats. So I've got these 2 little kitty cat fussy cuts, and I believe these are about 3.5 inches square, but I will measure them for you really fast just so that you know. So that each half of the ball is going to have a different cat. And these are, so yeah, these are just a teensy bit over 3.5 inches. Now this is something that you can vary. You can have a slightly larger picture or a slightly smaller picture, but you will have to adjust the placement of your outer layers, which we'll be talking about as we go through making the ornament. But you do want to make sure that whatever you choose to use in the center of your ornament, that you've left about 1.5 inches or so of fabric surrounding the actual image itself, because we'll need some fabric to be able to pin into and then be able to hide those pins with the outer layers. So hopefully that made sense, but you'll see what I'm talking about as we make the ornament. Just make sure that when you cut out your image, that the entire image is not the 3.5 inches in size. You want the image itself to be smaller and the whole square, so the square as a whole, to be about 3.5 inches. And of course you need 2 because you need 1 on each half of the ball. Then for the surrounding layers, I've got 2 different fabrics here. I should just keep this here in the picture. You need 16 pieces of each fabric that you're going to be using in the surrounding layers. So I've done 2 surrounding layers, and I've used this lighter floral, this white floral fabric, and then the blue floral fabric. So there's 8 pieces on each half, and then when you flip it over, there is the same 8 pieces of each color. And these pieces are about 2 inches by 3 inches in size. So they're rectangular in shape, 2 by 3. And then finally, you need 1 longer piece of ribbon, or fabric, that is going to be about 2.5 inches wide by about 10.5 inches long. And this is the piece that's going to wrap around and cover all the raw edges from each half of your ball when they meet in the center. You're gonna have a line of pins showing and raw edges showing, and this is what you're gonna use to cover that. Now for embellishments, I am going to be using some crystal beads. I've got some really light pink crystal beads that I'm going to put around my star and just kind of accent those points a little bit. And then I've also got some ribbons here. Now, these ribbons are a little bit different than the ones on this one because I wanted to dress it up just a little bit. So I've got a pink satin and then also a pink glitter ribbon. Now, the glitter ribbon and the pink satin ribbon are both, for the bows, are both 24 inches long. And then also you'll need 1 slightly shorter piece. This is going to be about 10 to 11 inches long, and that is what you'll use for your hanger. So this, again, just like everything else that we're doing in this ornament, this can vary. You could use 3 bows if you wanted to. You could use no bows if you wanted to. You will need something to use as a hanger, of course, but you don't have to use bows. You could decorate with anything that you want to up here. We've got other videos that show different ideas for embellishing the top of your ornament, like flowers, beads, all sorts of different things. But if you want to do bows like this, I usually like to use a piece that's about 24 inches long for each bow that I'm going to be using, and then of course, like I said, about 10 to 11 inches for the hanger. And last but definitely not least, you are going to need a whole bunch of straight pins. So you're probably going to be using about 170 or so straight pins for this pattern if you plan on making lots of these ornaments. And if you head to my website, again, link right below, I've got a big giant supply list with links to where I like to buy my pins in bulk. Now, one more thing that you are going to need, actually 2 more things, is you will need a flexible tape measure, and you're going to need some sharp scissors that will cut easily through fabric. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we are going to take the first square of fabric and decide what we want the very center to be. Now, in most cases with these type of ornaments, it's going to be the center of the actual image that you're using. Now, in some cases, you may want to adjust that. I've got another video on my YouTube channel that kind of describes doing snow globe ornaments more generally, not specifically to this little kitty cat fabric, and it talks about how to kind of adjust your center image if it's not something that you want perfectly centered in the middle. But in this tutorial, we're going to go with just centering it perfectly. And I'm going to look at my foam ball and I'm going to start over top of one of those imprints. And again, I don't think that you are going to be able to see this in my video because it looks like it is completely flashed out. Actually, really quickly, let me see if I can zoom in and show you. Maybe that will work. Nope, it doesn't appear. It's gonna be flashed out. So you'll have to take my word for it and find your imprint. You'll be able to see it if you have one of these kind of balls. And I'm gonna go ahead and stick my pin right into one of those imprints. Oh, you can kind of see it right there, I think. You can see that imprint just a tiny bit. I'm trying to find the angle. There it is. You can kind of see it right down in there. So I'm going to go ahead and push that right straight on top. And then I'm going to smooth my piece of fabric down over that. And I'm going to take a couple of pins and just pin this at the top, bottom, and then the left and right sides of my image. And notice I'm not pinning right beside it because I need to leave myself some room. There's going to be some of that fabric showing in the finished ornament, and I don't want to pin there. Otherwise the pins would be showing. So I've got 4 pins holding it in place. And now I'm going to go ahead and grab a rectangle of my first fabric, which is going to be this lighter floral. And we're going to start that first layer that is surrounding the image. So holding the rectangle with the pattern side facing away, I'm going to fold over the top edge just a tiny bit. Now you do not have to be exact with this. I usually like to fold it over about 1/3 of the way or so. And then I'm going to take another pin and just pin right through the top center of that rectangle, a hair below that top folded edge. So I've got this. It's ready to pin into my ball. And now I'm going to grab the ball and look at my image. And I want to pin, I'm going to start at the bottom here, and I'm just going to come down from my image a small amount. Now, of course, this is going to depend on the image that you're using. So if you've got a larger image, you're not going to want to leave a whole lot of room surrounding it, because then you won't have enough room for all of your layers on this half of the ball. My image, I think, is about 1.5 inches in size. And let me just grab my tape measure so I can verify that. So, yeah, I'm like, my little kitty cat is just slightly, like a hair above 1.5 inches wide and a hair below 1.5 inches wide or tall. So I'm coming down from my image just about, looks like about 1/4 inch from the bottom of the image. A lot of times with these ornaments, it just takes experimenting. Just come off of your image a little bit of space and then see what you can fit in layers until you get to the halfway point of the ball. And remember, you could always add or take away layers as well. So if you are too close, if you have a very small image and you come in and start really close to the middle, you could always do 3 layers. We're only going to be doing 2 layers on this ornament, but you could do 3. It's all about experimenting and just kind of figuring it out as you go. So I'm about to move forward without even telling you what I'm doing. So I'm going to fold down my left side straight down towards that equator line of my ball and creating half of a triangle. And then I'm going to fold down the right side the same way, but this time I've just slightly overlapped my left side, and I'm doing that so that when I stick a pin in here to hold it in place, I can use 1 pin to hold down both halves. And I am basically making sure that that point that I've created on this triangle points directly at the very center pin that I placed in the middle of my image. And I'm going to grab a pin and pin right there in the middle to hold both of those halves in place. Now for now, I am going to leave the 2 corners free. If you have watched the Basic Star workshop that I've got here on YouTube and also on my website, then you know that we usually pin down the left and right. We're not going to do that yet. We are going to do that in just a couple of minutes. Now I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to do the exact same thing with another piece of fabric. Taking a rectangle of fabric, pattern side facing away, and then folding over that top edge just a little bit. And I'm going to start directly opposite of my first point and about the same distance from my image that I did for my first point. Grabbing another pin, pinning right in the center, and then creating that same fold. Now this is the basic triangle fold. That's what we call this fold. We use this in a lot of our quilted ornament patterns. Now this time, before I use my pin to hold this in place, I'm going to take a really good look and make sure that the line that I've just created down the center of this triangle lines up perfectly with not only that center pin, but also the line down the center of my very first triangle. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and stick a pin in the bottom to hold both of those two pieces in place. Again, I'm going to leave my left and right corners free. And now I'm going to go ahead and do that on the left and right side of my kitty cat. So I'm just kind of eyeballing this to see if I'm about the same distance as I've been on the other couple of triangles that I've added. Pinning right there in the center and then creating that basic triangle fold. Now this time I'm aiming that center line and the point of my triangle directly into the center of my image. And I'm feeling like this could probably move over just a teensy bit. All right, and again, leaving my left and right corners free, and I'm gonna flip this over and do the exact same thing directly opposite. Now on this side, I'm going to account for a little bit of extra tail here. It looks like the tail comes out on this side a little bit further than his head comes out on this side. So I'm accounting for that just a little bit. And creating my triangle. And now I'm just taking a look at this from the front so that I can see if everything looks like it's pretty even. I want to make sure that the lines all going across from each other line up with each other. And I'm pretty happy with this. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and work on pinning down these outer corners. But before we do that, we don't wanna just start pinning them because then we're gonna have all this excess bulk here in the middle from that fabric square. So what we wanna do first, before we start pinning down corners, is smooth out those corners from the fabric square, and then we will pin down these on top. So I'm just gonna start at one of these corners, doesn't matter which one, and just smooth it down underneath of one of those triangles. Okay, so I just kind of pushed it down with my thumb and then I stuck a pin in there to hold it in place. And now I'm gonna do the same thing over here and pin it in place. Now, after you make a few of these, you want to save on pins rather than pinning down the square and then pinning down my triangle corner. What you could do is pull it down and then just smooth your triangle on top and then pin your triangle down, and that will hold it down also. But when you're starting out, it can be helpful to smooth down, pin, and then push your triangle corner down on top. Now you may still have just a little bit of a crinkle right here at the very bottom. That is totally fine though, because we are going to be putting another set of triangles in between of all of these spaces, and that will be covered up. What you don't want is a bunch of bulk like up here in the corners, okay, because that would show. So we're just going to work our way around the ball and just smooth things down. So I'm looking at this one here, and just because I just saw my my pin kind of peeking out over here, and I'm thinking that I want to bring this triangle in just a little bit closer. I thought I had accounted enough for that tail sticking out, but I don't think I did now that I'm looking at it again. So I'm just going to come in a teensy bit closer. That's what's nice about making this type of ornament, is that you can completely redo anything that you want to. It's all pinned, there's no glue, there's no sewing, so anything that you do is not permanent. Until you start cutting fabric, it's not permanent. I always have one hard corner to do in every single one of these that I do. So in this case, I'm going to play with this one a little bit more. See how if I pull this down just a tiny bit, I can kind of pull the top part flat. So what I'm going to do is pull that down and stick a pin down there just to kind of help hold it in place. And I'm going to unpin this and just push this down a little bit more, help hide a little bit more of those crinkles. Sometimes you just kind of have to play with it, and you can always use extra pins if you have to. All right, so now we have a really smooth center to work with. So what we're going to do is just put 4 more of that same fabric to fill in those 4 spaces between the triangles that we've already added. So I'm just kind of coming down from my center image about the same distance that I've been coming down all along, and then just centering it right in between. And I'm basically here trying to line up the point of this triangle so that it will be directly opposing the triangle that I put here. And I want it to point right at the center of this section. That way, after all the triangles are placed, all of my lines and my star will be even. You can also use a tape measure. If you find that helpful, you could line up your tape measure along both of those points to make sure that they are lining up with each other. And it's always this first layer of triangles that's the hardest because you're eyeballing, but once you put this first layer on, all the other layers can go off of this one. You can use this one to eyeball all the rest of them, and it makes it much, much easier. So just take your time on this very first layer, and then all your remaining layers will be way easier to do. All right, layer 1 is done. Now we're going to do one more layer of fabric on this half, and this layer is, like I said, much, much easier. So I'm going to grab my second fabric. So these pieces are going to be folded the exact same way. We're folding down the top edge just a little bit. The pattern side was facing out. Pinning through that top center, just eyeballing the center. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually place these at the points that we created around our center square when we put this first layer of fabric on. So we kind of created like a star shape, and now we're going to place these at each of the points. This pattern is kind of like a cross between the Snow Globe pattern and the Starburst pattern. So it's missing a couple of layers from the Starburst pattern, but it's sort of similar. So we're going to create that same basic triangle fold. And now this time, when we create that center line in the middle of our triangle, we're going to make sure that that line lines up with the opposite point. That way, when we place a triangle here, they all line up. Okay? So we're just going to line that up like that, and then, like usual, stick one pin in to hold both halves in place. Now this time we can go ahead and pin down the corners as well. And now we'll just flip this over and do the same exact thing directly opposite. Pinning right there in the very top. You can see I kind of took a shortcut there. Rather than folding it over and sticking my pin in, I just folded it right on my ball and stuck a pin in, and that's kind of what I like to do. Once you get really comfortable with doing the folding and pinning, I think that that's a lot easier. Creating that point, and again, just making sure that that center line lines right up with the center line of that opposing triangle. And now we'll go ahead and do that at the east and west sides of the image. And now we'll do the exact same thing on the remaining 4 star points. Just kind of eyeballing it here to make sure that everything is staying straight. It's really important that you keep all your lines straight, because then when we begin the second side, we can line up all of our triangles lines from this side with our first side, and that way when you look at the ornament from the side, everything will look really even and symmetrical. Over the years, since I've been selling my ornaments and then selling kits and patterns and things, I've had so many people say, how do you get your ornaments to look so even and symmetrical? And this is how: worrying about those lines. Just always thinking about where those lines are pointing. It actually becomes second nature. It seems kind of like a pain in the beginning, but it becomes second nature. When you start thinking about where all your points are pointing and where all your lines are lining up, it becomes easy and your ornaments will look perfect. Alrighty, that is side 1 all done. Looks so good. Now what we're gonna do is go ahead and take out this center pin at this point. And if you've got a little hole there, all you have to do is kind of take your fingernail and just kind of like rub out that little hole, and the fibers of the fabric will just fill it in and you will not be able to see it anymore. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and begin the second side, and we're gonna need that second square of fabric, and we're gonna do the exact same thing that we did for the first half. We're gonna find the center of our image. So I'm just gonna take a look at my little kitty cat here. He's so cute. And I'm gonna find the center. Just eyeballing. It does not have to be perfect, but to me it looks like the center is about right there. And I'm looking at this as a whole. So I'm looking at like the fishbowl, the bottom half of the fishbowl here is the bottom half of my image. And then from above that and all the way up to his ears and around, even including this little dead space here, because that is part of the image. That's the top half. And I'm gonna look at my ball, and really quickly, I forgot to say this before, we're going to take a couple of pins and make marker points so that when we flip this over and stick our second piece of fabric in, we know which side is the north, south, west, and east. So looking at the front of the ball, here's the top of my ornament right up here. I'm going to stick a pin in line with that triangle and just kind of like leave it sitting there. It's not pushed in all the way because I'm going to be removing it. This is just simply a marker pin. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing down here. So now I've got the top and the bottom. Then I'm going to do the same thing at the west and east sides. Again, I'm using these triangles that I placed, and I'm lining up my pin with the center line of those triangles. Alrighty, so now I've got north, south, west, east marked out, and if I flip this over, I know this is my my north. Sorry, I'm looking at my screen and not at the ornament. And here in the center is my imprint, which you really can't see. There it is. Can you see that? There's my imprint. That's where I want to stick that center pin from the middle of my new image. I want to stick that right inside there. Oops, it's going on an angle. And then I want to line the top of my little kitty cat image with my top pin. I want to align the bottom with my bottom pin down here. And then also my west and east sides, I want to line up with those two side pins. And if I do that and stick my first 4 pins in, keeping them in line with those marker pins, then when I start to put on my first layer of fabric, I can keep everything even with the first half of the ball. Now his face is not quite centered as the center of the image. And so I'm trying to keep that in mind. It's easy to kind of like want to pull him and center his head with my top pin up here, but that's not really the center of the image. The center of my image is where I put my pin. So as long as my pin here is even with that north pin, then I know I'm good to go. It can take some practice, but those marker pins really help a lot. So now that we've got those in place, I'm gonna leave my marker pins in for just another couple of minutes while I begin the very first layer, which is my light floral fabric of triangles. Because what I'm gonna do is when I place these triangles, remember I'm gonna do this just like I did on the first layer. I'm gonna come down from my image just a little bit, lining up my top center pin with that middle pin. But what I'm going to do is when I create my triangle, folding down my left and then my right halves, I'm going to not only line up that center line with my center pin, but also with that marker pin. That is going to ensure that my center line here lines up with my center line on side 1. And actually, I'm just going to take this pin and use it to hold that in place. And I'm going to do that for all 4 sides. My pins keep going in on an angle, creating that basic triangle fold, and then of course making sure that my line is lining up with my center pin and with the point of the triangle that I just placed, and with my marker pin, which I'm going to take and use to hold that in place. Creating that triangle. And now I'm just going to kind of shift this up just a tiny bit because I want it to line up with that marker pin here. It almost looks like what I can do is just kind of come up a teensy little bit. I think my marker pin though is kind of sitting on a little bit of an angle to the left too, which is throwing me off. And I'm probably being a little bit too much of a perfectionist here. Oops, gotta use that. And now we'll do one more over here. All right, so now just like we did on the first half, we're gonna take a couple of minutes and just smooth out all of these extra excess pieces of fabric that are between our new triangles, and then put our smooth down the edges of our triangles and pin them down. Just like that. We're going to do that all the way around. So now we can go ahead and put those final 4 triangles of this layer in between of the triangles that we just placed. And actually, let me move that pin out of the way. My fabric is sticking together. So I'm actually going to keep my pins up just a little bit higher on the bottom of my triangles on these 4 pieces as I've done for all the remaining triangles, because I'm starting to overlap side 1 a little bit. And that's totally fine if the fabric overlaps, but I don't want my pins to overlap. That way, once I finish this layer, I can trim off this excess and keep my pin line in the center of the ball, right around where that equator line was, if we could still see it, which of course we can't, but that is about the center of the ball, and that's about where we want our pins to be and what we will be putting our band over top of. Alrighty, there is layer 1 of side 2, and now I'm going to go ahead and trim off that excess fabric so that it is not in my way. So what I just did, totally just, well, first of all, I don't think my pin was holding down both halves of my triangle there, so I'm going to fix that. But I'd also cut a little bit too high, I think. All right, so moving on to our last layer, our very last layer of the ornament. And remember, I started these pieces at the points that were created in the center around our kitty cat. So I'm gonna just go ahead and pick one of those points, folding over that top edge just like I've done on every other triangle or every other rectangle to create my triangle. And I'm going to point this straight up through the center like always, and then right across to the opposing point, and make sure that my line that I've created down the center lines up with the line from the first side. That way, both of my halves are even with each other. Now you'll notice too at this point that I'm overlapping a whole lot more into the first half of the ball. So what I want to do is I want to keep my pin line in line with the center of the ball going around, which means I have to pin a lot higher up on the bottom of my triangles than I've done before. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the corners, pinning up higher. That way, that center pin line is staying even in the center, and all of this excess can be trimmed off when I'm done the layer. And actually on this layer, I'm going to trim off after the first 4 pieces and then again after the last 4. Whoops, I'm doing it like a basic star. That I just find it easier on the last layer because we're overlapping so much more. I find it easier to trim after 4 pieces and then trim again after the next 4. So with this same number of fabric pieces, you could actually also do the basic star pattern. I mean, as you can see, it is just the last layer is the only layer that's different. Rather than pinning in the points like this, you would pin right over top of the triangles that you'd already placed, and then you'd have the basic star pattern. So So it's really fun how you can just make simple changes in a lot of these patterns and come up with something completely different. So now that I've put on 4 pieces, I'm going to go ahead and trim those. I'm actually going to raise that pin up just a little bit. Now we've got just 4 more pieces to go. So see how I can see that pin a little bit even when I put my point down? I'm going to go ahead and pin this down, and then I'm just going to go ahead and take that guy out of there because it should stay, because we've got other layers on top now that will hold it in place. And if you're worried about it, you can always kind of take these pins out of these last couple of pieces that you put on and just put a pin lower to hold it in place if you're worried about it staying. Same thing here. Got a pin showing. I'm just going to remove it. Same thing here. Got a lot of pins showing on that layer. All right, and actually while I'm at it, let me go ahead and remove that center pin. Just kind of work out that little hole so it doesn't show. Now I'm going to do one last trim. Now be careful as always that when you're trimming, and it's not going to happen there, but when you're trimming that you don't accidentally stick the blade of your scissors into the first half of the ball like what you're seeing here. I always like to just make sure that before I actually start slicing that I can see the end of my blades. If I can see the end, then I know it's not stuck in somewhere where it shouldn't be. Alrighty, that is side 2 already done. And now we're gonna go ahead and put the band on, which is gonna cover all these raw edges that we've got in the center. So for my center, I've got a pretty narrow area that I need to cover. Sometimes you might have a wider area, like your pins are a little bit more spread apart, and you have a wider area to cover, or you have a narrow area like what I've got. And what you can do with your band, when you fold it, you can make it wider or more narrow depending on your needs. So what I need, of course, like I said, is a more narrow. So what I want to do is fold this in almost all the way from one side to the other, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side to create this more narrow band. Okay, but if you need a wider band, you can fold it over a little bit less. So right here I've only folded about to the halfway point, and I'm going to fold it over the same. And now I've got a more narrow band, so that will be very handy if you've got a big wide area that you need to cover all those raw edges. But let me go back to my narrow band. So I folded this almost in half lengthwise, and then almost in half again. And now I've got this raw edge running alongside this side of the band, but I'm going to flip it over. That way no raw edges are showing. And I'm going to lay this, looking at my ornament and seeing which side is the top, which is up here, of course. I'm going to lay this right on top, right where I know my bow and hanger are going to be sitting. And I'm going to stick a couple of pins in there to hold it in place. I'll see how I've got that line right up with the top of my ornament. And of course, it'll be even on both sides. Now what I'm going to do is continue that fold and pulling this band all the way around the ball, hiding all of those raw edges and pins as I go. Now what you want to do here is pull it tight enough that it doesn't look really bulky from the side, so it doesn't look kind of pillowy and poofy on the side, but also not so tight that you yank the pattern out of the fabric. You don't want to distort whatever pattern you've got in your fabric. So it's kind of like a happy medium, and it does get easier after you do it a couple of times. And you're just going to pull it right up to the very top where you started, and then put another couple of pins in there to hold it. And if you've got any excess like I've got here, you can just go ahead and snip it off, and that is it. So we've just got a couple more steps to go. We're going to embellish it and then add the bows. So first of all, let's do the beads. So well, if you're using beads, in the kit we've got some beads, and I'm going to place a bead at each of these star points going around my kitty cat star. And to do that, I am just going to pin them right on. Easy peasy. I love using beads on these ornaments because it is so simple and it adds so much extra bling. Okay, so we're actually going to need one more bead, and that's going to be for the hanger. So I'm going to get one more bead and thread it through a pin and just kind of set it to the side for a second. It's going to wait for me, and now I'm going to work on the bows. So I'm going to start with my pink satin ribbon. That's going to be my bottom bow. And all I'm going to do is just take a pin and put it right through one end of the satin ribbon. And then I'm going to just go ahead and make loops. So I usually like to do loops that are about 3 to 3.5 inches. So if you want to use a tape measure the first couple of times you make a bow, you can, and it might make it a little bit easier. Or you can just eyeball. I'm eyeballing about 3 to 3.5 inches, and then just creating a loop and pinning right back through. And now I'm going to bring that down and do the exact same thing the opposite direction. So now I've got 2 loops, and I'm going to keep on going until I get to the end of my ribbon. Alrighty, so there I've got my bow, and I'm just going to pop this right on top of where that band ended. So right where that last raw edges and those last couple of pins are showing, I'm just going to stick that right on top, and that's going to totally hide that. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing with my other longer piece of ribbon, which in my case is this glittery ribbon. Now this glittery ribbon is one-sided, so I'm going to loop it just a little bit differently than what I did with the satin. I'm still going to stick a pin right through one end, like I did the first time, and I'm still going to create my first loop just like I did. However, this time, rather than going back and looping again, because that would result in a loop that was showing the unfinished side, instead I'm going to just loop it forward like this, and then pin through, oops, I'm losing my grip, and then pin through the top. So now I've got a loop that is showing the glitter. And you can use this trick for any one-sided ribbon. A lot of different printed ribbons are just one-sided. In fact, there's a lot of satin ribbons that are not double-faced, they're only single-faced, so you could use this for that kind of ribbon as well. And now I've got my glittery ribbon bow, and I'm going to go ahead and just stick this right on top. That is so cute. And now I've just got one last step. We've got that one shorter piece of glittery ribbon, and I'm going to go ahead and create a loop by putting the 2 ends together. Now this is going to be the hanger. I've got my 2 ends together, and remember that beaded pin that we set aside? We're going to stick that right through those 2 ends to hold them together. And then we're going to put this right on top of that last ribbon bow that we added. Now if you want to, you can stick a little teeny bit of glue between that hanger and that last bow. You don't have to. I mean, I've really never had a need, unless it was a super heavy ornament, it should stay in place even without glue. But if you feel more secure by putting some glue in there, you can totally do that. And that is it, all done. Easy and so, so cute. So I hope that you had fun making this. And of course, as always, if you have any questions, please just put them in the comments below and I will help you out the best that I can. Thanks so much for watching and happy ornamenting.